Hello, and welcome to the relaunch of the S2G podcast. My name is Tanya Backwitses, and I'm the Managing Director of Marketing. I will also be your host for this podcast. Our podcast has been dormant for a year or so while we took some time to regroup and think about what this could look like and what it could offer to our community. We decided to relaunch it because we see this medium as an intimate way to let others in on some of the conversations we're having at S2G about food, agriculture, oceans, energy, and the critical opportunities at the seams of all these sectors. After all, one of our main objectives is to build relationships, community, and a support network around the technology and solutions that can transform the health of people and the planet. In this podcast, we will bring you conversations with entrepreneurs, investors, policymakers, corporates, and cutting-edge thinkers who will explore some of the opportunities for innovation and collaboration that get our team at S2G out of bed in the morning. This podcast is for our community, and we welcome suggestions for future conversations. And if you enjoy listening, please don't forget to subscribe. So thanks for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy. As a reminder, this content is for informational purposes only. It should not be taken as legal, business, tax, or investment advice, or be used to evaluate any investment or security, and is not directed at any investor or potential investor in any investment vehicle sponsored by S2G. Investing involves risk, including the risk of loss. Specific companies mentioned in this podcast are for educational purposes and should not be construed as an endorsement of any kind. Please note that S2G may maintain investments in some of the companies discussed on this podcast. For more important information, please see s2gventures.com/disclosures. I'm so excited to be bringing you this conversation today with our own Chuck Templeton. Chuck is probably best known as the founder of OpenTable, but I know him as a coworker, a beloved mentor to countless entrepreneurs, DJ Tempo. Yes, he DJs our annual summit after parties. He's also a boundless source of energy, a wealth of business acumen, and just a truly top-notch human being. I wanted to interview Chuck, especially right now, because so many of his experiences at OpenTable and with companies such as Grubhub and CleverSafe are remarkably relevant to founders today. For example, in this episode, Chuck shares the incredible lengths he had to go to in order to sell an internet-based reservation system to restaurants when most of them did not even have an internet connection. We work with many companies operating at the frontier of their sectors and know that onboarding those early customers is a resource-intensive process. But scale is critical for a business to make it, and Chuck was able to polish the friction off of the process, as he says, and get to a point where OpenTable was ready for IPO. OpenTable was also one of the earliest two-sided networks, which are, of course, everywhere today. Chuck talks about how he approached the challenge of launching a two-sided network and how he segmented customers based on their objectives, which helped dial in the sales process. Chuck has so much advice and perspective to offer from his career, spanning entrepreneurship, mentorship, and venture capital, and I hope you find this conversation as illuminating as I did. This was also the first conversation in our new recording studio, and we had some fun testing out all the new tech. So let's dive into it. Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good. I don't think this is recording, though, so 1 second. Oh, there we go. New technology, Chuck.
It's crazy.
It's amazing.
It's like a whole new era.
I know. Well, it's a new era of our office in S2G coming ahead of us. It's exciting to be here in this new recording studio, which we're trying out for the first time.
Yes.
So thanks for bearing with us. I think we should get into it. Thanks for coming in. Yeah. So I am incredibly excited to be sitting down with you today to dig into your career and the lessons and advice you have for entrepreneurs and investors from your wealth of experience on both sides of the table. So I think before we start, I obviously know you pretty well. We've been working together for 3 years, which has been a joy. But would be great if you could introduce yourself to the audience and talk a little bit about your role at S2G to kick us off.
Great. Yeah. So Chuck Templeton, Senior Managing Director here at S2G Ventures. Been around for about 8.5 years now, and, got involved early on with Lucas and the whole team there, and then got to know Sanjeev, early on as trying to come on board and trying to help get things going. They, early on had some financial background in the MD suite, and so we're looking for someone with a little bit more operational experience and working with entrepreneurs and whatnot. So got to get to know Lucas through some other investments he was doing, and he asked if I was interested in trying to help him put his capital to work for impact, and that's exactly what I wanted to do. So worked out great.
Here we are. Chuck, despite your many accomplishments, you are probably the most humble person I've ever met. So today on this podcast, we're going to take you out of your comfort zone a little bit and get you to talk a little bit more about your past. We definitely want to hear more about those accomplishments because I know there's so much entrepreneurs and investors can learn from you. So let's start at the beginning, if that's okay. You grew up in Lafayette, California, in the East Bay. What kind of exposure did you have to the startup environment and culture in Silicon Valley as it was becoming what it is today?
Yeah, I mean, when I was growing up, I didn't know a lot about the startup world or entrepreneurship. And, my mom was a glassblower and my dad was a mailman. So came from really a blue collar background and hadn't really thought about being an entrepreneur, except for when I was in 6th grade, I would go over to the high school and buy Jolly Ranchers, and you'd buy them by the pack of 10 or 12. And would pay 30, 35 cents for it. And then I'd be able to sell them for 10 cents each. And so if it's a pack of 10 or 12, you pay 30 cents, sell it for $1.20, pretty good gross margin there, and started to learn a lot about, how do you do something that's profitable, obviously on a very small scale there. But it really was something where I started thinking about, okay, you can take something that someone's already done or an idea that people haven't had and just bring it to a new scenario or a new situation. And so just started to learn to experiment there. And then one other thing that was pretty influential for me when I was growing up was, I'd ride my bike to school in the morning, and there was this one truck that had a bumper sticker on it that just said question authority. And so, I was growing up, both my parents were very strict on a lot of things, and it wasn't about question authority with them. It was really about, do what I say, when I say to do it, how I say to do it. And so that was sort of one of the first things that I had really thought about, like why you should do things differently, or just because something's being done a certain way doesn't mean that's being done the right way. And so it's always been something that's stuck in my head.
Very interesting. It sounds like you were entrepreneurial from a very young age and stuck with you.
Yeah.
Talking about questioning authority, one of the other experiences I know you talk about a lot, and you tell stories about your time in the Army. So curious how you ended up becoming a Ranger. Why did you decide to do that, especially with that question authority mindset in mind? And would love to hear more about the Ranger competition. I hear it was no joke, and you did pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, the military was a great time for me. In all sort of honesty, I was never in combat or anything like that. And so obviously a, deep amount of respect for people who've put their lives at risk and whatnot. But the Army was a great time for me. I was, 18. I was graduating from high school. I was a little bit of a knucklehead, got in a lot of trouble at that point in time. And I just joined the military for 5 basic reasons. And one of them was, just to sort of get time away. Not that I was hoping the military would mature me, but that extra couple of years I was hoping would actually give me time to sort of grow up and think a little bit. 2 is paying for college. I came from, again, a blue collar family, didn't have a lot of money. And, there was no college savings or anything. And so I was going to have to do that. So, college with the Montgomery GI Bill and the Army College Fund was a great thing there. 3, I'd been fairly insulary, grew up in a couple small towns or relatively small towns in California, just outside the Bay Area. Lafayette, small town, 30,000 people. It was probably, 20,000 people at the time. So a little bit smaller. 4 was that my dad was in the military. So always kind of felt like there was something that, he did it, so I should do it. And then the 5th was really this idea of giving something back. I never had to avoid mines on the way to school or something like that. And so always had a very just cushy growing up. And so just felt like I should give something back. I was lucky enough to go into a unit that was a pretty hardcore unit and got to do the Best Ranger competition as part of that. And, it was one of the hardest experiences I've done physically in my life, and actually did pretty well. 40 teams started, 16 teams finished. We came in 9th. And one of the things I really think about is I'd never really gone to combat, but when you're in that moment and things are hard, how do you react? And so I always sort of think about it. I did a lot of adventure racing after the military to sort of put myself in situations where it was hard. And what do? Do you get into the fetal position on the ground, or do you really get up and lean through and push into something? And I think in this phase of my life is where I really started to think about philosophy and the whole concept of nothing's good or bad, thinking makes it so. You can use your mind to really say, this sucks and I'm going to quit, or this is how it is. So soldier up and move on.
How does all that shape how you work today in your role at S2G, how you think about, helping entrepreneurs grow their businesses? Are there any key takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things I think is to not get too high or too low when something happens, right? Like if you win a customer, let's not get too high. If you lose a customer, let's not get too low. How do you push through in a way that these are the cards you're being dealt? You got to use these cards going forward, and that's a day-to-day situation. And so how do you really focus on moving the perception out of the equation and really focusing on, okay, this is what happened and how do I move forward?
Amazing. So fast forward a little bit, you go to California Polytechnic, you get married, and your new in-laws are coming for a visit. So this is a bit of founder folklore. I know you've talked about this story a bit, but could you tell how that moment sparked the idea for OpenTable?
Yeah, so as I got out of college and whatnot, I came back up to the Bay Area, and that's really where I started to understand the Silicon Valley startup mindset and world. And so I would go to happy hours every other week about some startup, their launch party and all that. So I'm like, hey, this thing called the internet seems like it might be interesting. Maybe I should get involved with it. And so I applied to a bunch of internet companies, probably, 12 or 13 different internet companies. And all of them, basically, the message was I didn't have enough internet experience. And this was in 96, 97, where there wasn't a lot of internet experience happening around the Bay. So I couldn't get a job there. And so one weekend when my wife was, her family's in the restaurant business, her dad was one of the co-founders of Let Us Entertain You here in Chicago. And so really knew high-end restaurants and good food. And my wife, Julie, is a foodie. And so they were coming into town the following weekend. And that Saturday morning, she spent 3.5, 4 hours really trying to focus on finding the right place. And they obviously have high expectations of the food they like, but also have allergies and some other stuff of certain types of food they can't eat. And she called around to a number of places and got voicemails or got busy signals or talked to people, and they could do 6, but they couldn't do 7. And watching her go through that process, I said, there's got to be a better way. So what I thought at the time is I had actually worked in restaurants and paid a lot of my way through undergrad. And so I thought there would just be this system out there that you just sort of plug the internet into the back of and you get online reservations. Well, in all my time working in restaurants, I'd never really realized that I'd never seen a electronic system at the host stand. It had always been paper books. And so quit my job 2 months after I got married, which my in-laws at the time then loved. We're really excited about that.
I'm sure they were.
And so went down this journey of having no idea. When before I got to undergrad, I thought an engineer was someone who drove a train. I'd never really fundraised. I'd never heard of what a venture capitalist was, but I was able to meet enough people who would pay it forward with me to answer questions or provide feedback or be open and honest with me. And so I just bumbled or stumbled or found my way through it. So I remember getting my first check I was trying to raise $2 million on my first round. And I remember getting my first $75K check and just, holding it up like it was in some office above another startup. And we had 600 square feet. And there were, probably 3 of us in the time. And I remember my other 2 people that were in the office working there. And they were trying to be heads down while this person's sitting there. And I'm going back and forth with them. And, he just pulls out his checkbook and writes me a check for $75K. We didn't have really documents or anything like that. And so it was just this moment where I was like, oh my gosh, this is what it takes. And so they were sort of snickering and smiling as they're working at their computers. And anyway, so it was a Sean Shicka dance. Yeah, wrote me my first check.
No matter how much fundraising you do, it's hard to forget that first check. At this point, OpenTable is a fledgling company trying to get busy restaurateurs to take a chance and adopt this new internet-based reservation system. But most restaurants at this time didn't have internet connectivity, so Chuck and his team had to jump through hoops, or more like jackhammer through concrete, to provide internet to those early customers.
Our philosophy was if a restaurant could sign an agreement while falling over, we would get it in. And I'm not sure where the while falling over originated from, but the whole idea was we're going to will this stuff. We would have people who would be crawling through rafters, bring in Cat 5 cable to get to the front host stand. And there's one restaurant that we really needed to get in San Francisco. They signed up, paid full price, but we actually then spent They had this beautiful host stand that was this like polished concrete floor with a pole that came up out of it and, a little sort of thing that looks like, something that would hold your music sheets type of top. And it was great, but there was no power there, right? And so when you're putting our system in, it's a computer, so it needs power. And so we spent $4,000 jackhammering up their polished concrete floor, putting in conduit, then, polishing it up and making it happen. And so we had this like just perseverance mindset that we would get stuff done.
But Chuck knew that this resource-intensive type of sales could only get them so far. He had to streamline the sales process by removing the friction for customers and for his sales team. And he came up with some pretty creative ways to do so.
One of the things I think we did well at OpenTable through time was really focus on what is the actual minimal need that needs to happen. And that was both from the restaurant side and the consumer side or the guest side. So one of the things that we tried to do as we talked about polishing the friction off the process was like take contracts, right? If it's a contract, that means lawyers. And lawyers obviously are really valuable, but the more you can get them out, the more you can get anyone out of the process, the better it is for these restaurateurs, right? And so we changed it from being called a contract to an agreement. Once you call it an agreement, don't need lawyers. Great. So then we would look at each paragraph or each clause within that and say, is this really necessary? Is this really necessary? Like we used to have a 2-year agreement that you would sign up for, and we had some restaurants push back on that. We're like, but no restaurant ever cancels with us, so why do we need a 2-year agreement? Let's just make it a month-to-month agreement. They can, re-up or not. So every time we then moved this from like a 4-page contract to a 1-page agreement, and anyone can sign a 1-page agreement, which then started to help us think about how do we move to, because it used to take, anywhere from 3 to 5 meetings with a restaurant because we had to go there. There was no doing Zoom or calling them on the phone because they actually wanted to see the product and feel it and understand it. And so we got into this thing, how do we get one-call closes so that a salesperson can go into a restaurant, because restaurants are interesting in that most of the owner-operators are owner-operators. That's what they do. They own it and they operate, especially at these high-end places. They are there on the floor all the time. And so there's not these big 9 to 5 windows that they have open. You can go visit them. Maybe you have from 10 in the morning till 11:30 because that's when lunch starts. You got an hour and a half there, and then you got 2 to 4:30 in the afternoon. So now you got 2.5 hours there. So you got basically 4 hours a day. We got it down to about a 35-minute sales call. And so did we always get one-call closes after we sort of moved through that process? No, but now it went from like an average of 4 or 5 visits to 2 to 3 to a certain percentage of them became one-call closes, and then when we first started, a salesperson could close 3 restaurants a month, 4 restaurants a month. But then we got to the point to where they were doing 18, 20, 25 restaurants a month.
So you were one of the first to build a 2-sided marketplace. Now we see them in so many more places. They're everywhere today. And even on the, in the sectors that we work, we're starting to see them emerge. We work with a couple, Flash Foods, Territory Foods. Can you talk a little bit about the parallels you might see in your journey and what you see specifically in food, Ocean's Energy, and is there an application to these new sectors and frontiers?
So like you said, we were some of the first to do 2-sided networks out in the market. So you had restaurants on one side, consumers on the other side. Everyone talks about how do you start a 2-sided network if it needs 2 sides to get going? Do you sell the restaurants first or the consumers first? And we were able to figure out, okay, in this scenario, we do restaurants first because we actually have a tool that does 3 things. It does reservation management, table management, and guest management. So reservation management, making, changing, canceling, confirming reservations. Guest management, who are my VIPs? When's the last time I've been there? What do they like when they come here? Is there a favorite table or type of food? And then table management. So once the evening begins, who's sitting at what table? How long have they been there? When are they likely to get up? So what we were able to do then is have this tool that worked at a restaurant long before a reservation ever came through the door. So now what we called seeded one side of the network, and we learned a lot of stuff around that. So when we go into a market, who are the influencers in the market? And each market had different ways of thinking about it. And so I certainly don't know all the answers on 2-sided networks, and every 2-sided network is different. But I think there are concepts that entrepreneurs or leaders who are building these 2-sided networks can really integrate into their process. One is just being iterative, right? That's sort of being an entrepreneur. As you try something, it doesn't work. You try something, it doesn't work. And so, one of the characteristics that I really look for when I'm working with entrepreneurs and thinking about potentially investing in them is this entrepreneur out in the wild trying to understand what the customer really wants and needs? So I would spend 2 to 3 hours a day, 3 to 4 days a week for maybe the first 6 to 9 to 12 months, just going in and watching. And what were they doing? What were they writing down? What were the questions they were asking when they would take a reservation? Which order did they ask for name or phone number or date or time or whatever, party size? And then how do we think about taking all of that and doing it as functionally consistent with their operations as possible? I think that's where, we have some great entrepreneurs who get caught up in the technology or the science, and they believe that build it and they will come. And that to me is the biggest challenge with a lot of these entrepreneurs, is that they are really good at the craftsmanship of what they're doing. They've not figured out fully how to interface that with the customer or the potential customer. And so how do you go out with an open mind and not have a prejudice, but going out and just really looking at what's happening in the market and with your customer and doing, focusing on customer discovery rather than sales out of the gate for a lot of these, to understand and really be in tune to what is happening at the customer level. And so that's where I think a lot of our portfolio companies have this opportunity, and just entrepreneurs and leaders in general, but really making sure they understand what the market actually wants.
Yeah. As you were on the ground, OpenTable, learning about these restaurants, looking at customers, understanding their needs, did you find segments of customers, or did you find that some were better to start with or more influential to get the product going out of the gate? How did you think about grouping and segmenting?
A little bit it was thinking about what is the value proposition that we brought. For OpenTable, the value proposition that we brought was for the restaurants who were normally full. They didn't have a problem with demand because they were the high-end restaurants. So the sale to them was not about internet reservations. They wanted to take better care of their current customers. So it wasn't about bringing them incremental business. It was about helping them sort of make sure that their best customers were getting the right treatment.
Right.
You had your high-end restaurants in a city. And so what we would do is for every city we went into, we'd look at the time, it was Zagat was the big, rating system there. And we'd look at the Zagat top 20 or top 25. So we would then go after those restaurants, selling them a product that actually helped them take better care of their current customers, right? Now, the next 75 restaurants in a market all want to be like those top 20 restaurants or 25 restaurants. And so whatever they're doing, so now you can use social proof to sort of sell the system. And then once you start getting 20, 30, 40 restaurants in a market for us, now we could start to show demand. So the next 200-300 restaurants just needed to get butts and seats, and they just needed more people to get there. So now the sales was a different sales or value proposition to them.
Right.
So it was really focusing about how do we get more customers in the door. And so our sales team learned to, as we went into a market, really evaluate how far are we in a market, what's our process here. And so we learned all those types of things that, again, think about this scale process, right?
Getting from the early stages of hustling for each customer to scaling for exit is one of the biggest and most critical challenges entrepreneurs face. Along the way, Chuck and his team focused on dialing in the sales process and understanding their customers and their reasons for using their product. From these experiences, Chuck has developed a framework that he uses with our entrepreneurs today for thinking about how to take a company from ideation to scale.
This whole idea of idea, validate, infrastructure, and scale. So, it's sort of the journey of a company. And they obviously go through lots of cycles of this depending on products and other things like that. But that idea of building infrastructure for scale is one of the things that I think many entrepreneurs don't intuitively understand unless they've been working for a while and been even part of an organization that's gone through it. You have an idea, then you go out and validate it. You talk to your customers, you talk to consumer, whatever it is, and you sort of make sure that, there's something there that people want and willing to pay for and willing to pay more than it costs you to build it. But then there's, how do you think about less people per sale, less dollars per sale, less cost per sale, and starting to accelerate it? The OpenTable experience, which was a huge lesson for me of this accelerating growth. We called it increasing returns, right? So for the amount of effort that you do, how do you get more out of that than you got a week ago for that same amount of effort? And there's one thing that I see that many entrepreneurs struggle with, or maybe just don't understand or haven't had the visceral experience of it. It's that infrastructure to scale piece. And when you get there, it's so beautiful because you're like defying gravity. Things they just happen.
Of course, no entrepreneurial journey is complete without some nail-biter moments. Chuck described one in particular that really showcases how touch and go the startup experience can be. To make this situation even more of a thriller, this is January of the year 2000. The dot-com bubble is about to burst.
We had a gentleman named Bill Gurley who was someone that we were very interested in because he had done some other two-sided networks at the time. And he was certainly is even more of an icon these days. But we had been targeting him to be an investor in us. And so early on, we were talking to him and he was interested, but, he wanted to see a bigger, didn't think selling to small businesses was possible to get to any scale. And so turns out we're raising our round of capital. It's a Thursday morning. We were going to miss payroll the next day. So we had 65 people on the payroll or about that. And we didn't know where the payroll was going to come from. We have 3 presentations that day. It's me and 2 of my other senior leaders. And one of them's a gentleman named Adam Dell. You may have heard of his brother, Michael, who, has been fairly successful also. And it turns out that Adam had been talking to Bill about 2 weeks earlier, and Bill had actually been to 3 of our restaurants in San Francisco where he saw the system sitting there. He didn't make the reservation online, but he saw the system sitting there. And each time he went and talked to the host, who the host would like pull him around behind the system and show him it. And, so the host was like fanatical about it. And so he got excited about it, but he was at a point in his career where he couldn't lead the deal. He could follow on, but he couldn't lead. And so Adam calls him, and Adam was, trying to find a deal to get done with one of the top VCs on the planet type of thing. And Bill had mentioned, I can't lead, but I could follow. There's a company called OpenTable. It's interesting, whatever. And so we're talking to Adam, and it's, again, 11 o'clock on a Thursday morning, and we're 15 minutes in. Adam's like, I'm in. And we're like, wait, what? Hold on. What'd you just say? And so, we're out sort of raising. We had gotten a lot of no's at the time because people didn't like the shoe leather aspect of what we had to do, of our salespeople going into restaurants, selling a restaurant that would pay you a couple $100s a month for this system, right? That just didn't seem like a model that could scale. So we're backslapping and high-fiving, but we got a problem. We have payroll in the morning. We're not going to be able to make it. So Adam says, will $1 million do you? We're like, $1 million to cover payroll. So he says, get me your wiring information. And that's when I had a Motorola flip phone with the like rubber buttons, and I'm, shaking to try and like press the right buttons. So I call our controller. Controller gives us wiring information. I give it to Adam. He sends it back to his office, and 2 hours later, we get wired $1 million.
Amazing.
No terms, no signatures, no documents. And so funding comes around, and it was a $10.5 million round. Adam was in for 3. Benchmark was in for 3. Zagat was in for 1.5. American Express was in for 1.5. And then our angel investors were in for the other 1.5. And so basically we were able to use that to then raise a later round sort of after, the dot-com implosion. And part of that was just because we had these fantastic financial partners in Benchmark and Impact Venture Partners, which was Adam Dell's fund.
And then the dot-com bubble bursts, and all these internet companies are unraveling. Chuck knows he has to focus on the financials, and he makes a big decision.
I mean, I had to, at the time, really think about, we're burning a lot of cash. I was a young entrepreneur at the time, or not as young as many are, but younger. And so we really had to think about what is the right thing to do for the business. And so at that point, it made sense to try and bring in more seasoned leadership. The market was looking for that. And so I hired myself out of the CEO role, brought in a gentleman named Thomas Layton, who was on the board at that point in time, so knew the business well. Because, we weren't the best at some of the financial aspects. So there was a lot of just financial diligence or financial tightening that Thomas came along and really helped us do. And so, but for us, it was really, again, this mentality of let's get it right. Let's not be right. We really wanted to focus on, okay, what is the market telling us? What are we seeing out there? How do we react to that and make sure that we're doing things in the right way?
This philosophy of getting it right and not tenaciously trying to be right enabled OpenTable to make it through the dot-com bubble. There are certainly many differences, but there are also many analogs between the market back then and the conditions today, especially when it comes to weathering a difficult fundraising environment.
Yeah, there's been so many parallels drawn between this dot-com bubble and the current state of the fundraising market today. As someone who, has obviously weathered a major downturn throughout this story that you shared with us and came out swinging, what advice do you have for entrepreneurs generally and in today's landscape?
Yeah, I think what I'm experiencing and what I experienced as an entrepreneur there is with process and with infrastructure, you can actually do a lot more than you think you can with fewer people. So as you're growing and you've raised capital, you're starting to hire people, and maybe you pivot a little bit this way or you pivot a little bit that way. And some of the people that you hired 6 months ago or a year ago aren't fully employed, or they're not fully doing because you've pivoted a little bit away from what they were doing, but yet you keep them on the payroll, right? And these are people, and they have families and that kind of stuff and whatnot. So you certainly have to there's a human component to it. But there's also a component that if the company gets too fat and heavy with people and whatnot, that you just can't survive. It's not good for anyone in the organization. And that's a very hard thing, especially for young managers to be able to do, is to let people go who aren't the right fit. It's, I think, best for them. It's best for the company. If you focus on the priorities, you can actually do a lot more than you think you can do with a lot less resources. When we did that final raise, we had 175 people on the payroll, and we did a layoff and down to 62 people on the payroll. And so I did a bunch of those people. The new CEO, did certainly some of those people and whatnot. But the whole idea is then how do we really maniacally focus on profitability?
So the end of this amazing story is that OpenTable is a tremendous success, went public in 2009, and then was acquired by Priceline Group for $2.6 billion in 2014. At this point, we've all used OpenTable. We really can't imagine not having this system to, make our reservations in our day-to-day life. It's really changed the game. So fast forward a little bit. Following OpenTable and your amazing experience there, you've worked with a number of companies, famously Grubhub, but also CleverSafe and Braintree. Can you talk a little bit about that, and what were you looking for when deciding to work with them, and what additional learnings did you bring from OpenTable to those experiences?
Yeah, in all three of those examples, which were all fantastic, it was really about people that were also infinitely curious, infinitely just start. Right? Mike Evans from Grubhub says this a lot and talks about it. Like, just start. I don't know the answer, but I'm just going to start. Right? And that was sort of the mindset, again, that we had at OpenTable, is just go out and do it and figure out what worked and what didn't work. Right? And so in working with them, Brian and Chris and Mike and Matt, those were all entrepreneurs who were out in it. They didn't know the answer, but they were going to go figure it out. And so was lucky enough to meet each of them here in Chicago, because when I moved from the Bay Area, so I hired myself out of the CEO role, was running sales. I could run sales from anywhere in the country. My wife was, from Chicago, so we decided to come back here as we were thinking about building our family. And when I went to meet the entrepreneurs and the investors in the community here, there was a little bit of we're not California, or we're not the Bay Area, we're not Silicon Valley. How do we become Silicon Valley? And I always kind of thought that, like, Chicago has so many awesome things going for itself. It should not try and be Silicon Valley. It should try and be Chicago, right? And I think that the way Mike built his business at Grubhub, the way Chris built his business at CleverSafe, and the way Brian built there, but were very much Midwest. And they just had a mindset that was focused on what works here in Chicago and how do we make it work for ourselves. And so they were refreshing, do what's necessary. Let's roll up our sleeves and let's get involved.
Were there any particularly exciting moments in those three journeys or pivotal points where you learned a new lesson that you want to share with our entrepreneurs?
I think one of the things in working with Grubhub and Mike in particular, it was an impact business out of the gate where he wanted to help the small guys compete against the big guys, right? Mm-hmm. And so it was about allowing these artisans, these entrepreneurs, to be able to have tools that were on par or as good as, the big guys at a similar price point that sort of made sense. So he was one of the people who really helped me from a business standpoint understand that you can do well and do good at the same time. So certainly valuable there. And then I think with Chris Gladwin in particular, I've never met anyone, and there's others out there certainly that do think this big, but he just thinks big. And on global scales, one of the fastest databases ever outside of Apple, Facebook, and Amazon type of thing. And now he's building the biggest analytics engine outside of maybe a couple of the big ones also who build their own software. But massive thinker, and just, what is the power of that?
So interesting journey across OpenTable, Grubhub, CleverSafe, Braintree. You've seen and been a part of some of these really, exciting companies' stages of growth, scale, et cetera. So can you talk a little bit about What did you learn from taking these 4 different companies through to exits? Was there any parallels in what made them successful, any differences, and what can we take away from that?
Yeah, I think in all of these, there was a clear vision that the leader had set and that they were focused on really, again, the word maniacal focus of trying to stay within their swim lanes. Like, didn't talk about it, but I know at OpenTable, we went in a couple directions where we thought we were going to do room service apps for one of our customers who had a bunch of restaurants and they own a bunch of hotels. So they wanted us to do like an order in room service. And then another, group came to us and said, well, we want to do a wait list management system, which is very different than a reservation system. And so, it's 2 technologies, it's 2 dev teams, it's 2 support teams, it's 2 sales teams, right? And so I think with all of these companies, one of the biggest thing that they had is a maniacal focus by the entrepreneur really on what their goals or vision were. And so the reason they did well also is that they figured out, it's one of my favorite expressions by Chris actually, is in order to be in business, you have to be in business, right? And so his whole idea of survival mattering, and how do you make sure that these companies aren't so obtuse that they have to have their way, and their way sometimes, is heading towards a cliff, right? And so they all figured out survival. And in order to have a billion-dollar company, you must first survive. And so that's where all of these entrepreneurs understood survival over almost anything else. Obviously, not, moral and ethics and that kind of stuff, but understood survival more than anything. And that to me is a valuable trait.
To close out our conversation, I wanted to ask Chuck about his perspective on investing and innovating in a time of black swans. We have seen so many of these black swan events recently, from the pandemic to the war in Ukraine. Chuck has an interesting perspective on helping companies not just be prepared for these unpredictable seismic events, but to emerge even more resilient than before.
We've talked about this a little bit. You spoke about this at Summit. It's been a challenging year, I would say, for fundraising in general, and a lot of our companies are really doubling down on operations and operational excellence, as you've talked about in this. But one of the things that you've kind of used to draw some parallels for us to your experiences in the past and what we're seeing now in food ag, oceans, and energy is this idea of black swans and what that means. And I know you're a big fan of Nassim Nicholas Taleb. You've talked about how we're living in this age of black swans or unpredictable rare events that can have a major impact. That could be from the pandemic to the war in Ukraine, the dot-com bubble, et cetera. Can you talk a little bit about, what this means to you and how you think about building antifragile companies as an entrepreneur, how you've applied this to your investment approach?
Yeah, with black swans, it really is trying to figure out how do you minimize your downside, but maximize or have an infinite upside type of asymmetric outcome or asymmetric possibility. And you never know when that luck or that serendipity is going to happen, but it's being in the right place at the right time for that. And part of that is, again, by making sure that you're meeting your customer needs. It's making sure that you're, got the best cost structure out there. It's making sure that you're focused on solving the problem, not on the solution that you're going to provide, to solve the problem, right? And so to me, I am a big believer of how do you think about this asymmetric outcome, this, sort of right place, right time, and really thinking about, in order to be in business, you have to be in business.
Well, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for taking so much of your time. We thought we might end our new podcast with one reflection of the day and what you're grateful for. So I'll start and tell you I'm so grateful that you took an hour and a half of your time with today to share so many amazing stories and insights. I think our community will have so much to learn from you, Chuck. So really appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah. And I'm lucky I get to work with entrepreneurs now, day in and day out. And so to see the team of people that we've assembled here and the passion that they've got around working with entrepreneurs and sort of some of the challenges and opportunities that they're helping them face. And I think we're trying to do something that's hard, but we're trying to do it in a way that's a little bit different than what is traditional from that standpoint. And I think the excellence that you bring and a lot of our team brings, I think in refreshing ways to solve some of these problems is what I get the most joy out of.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much for your time, Chuck.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into the S2G podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review, or share it with a friend. For more information or to connect with us, check out s2gventures.com.